What's up, YouTube, and welcome to another TikTok Theology Mastermind review. And in these segments, what we're doing is we are exploring what's being taught and preached in mainstream Christianity, really focusing on the popular platforms, what's getting a lot of play on TikTok, YouTube, and stuff like that, because these were typically the types of churches that I was aligned with. So I kind of want to give you some insight here into how these not necessarily how these churches operate, but really the theology, because there are a lot of people today, especially in the skeptics and unbeliever side, who have a lot of comments on modern church theology that are actually somewhat outdated and in many cases really missing the danger of a lot of what's being preached. Now, I am not saying all of it is dangerous. Some of this stuff is really good stuff. Like, honestly, I don't want to say good stuff, positive stuff, right? I'll say positive. I won't necessarily say good, and in many cases, I won't even say beneficial, because the problem comes in when you mix the good stuff with the bad stuff. I think Scripture says a little leaven leavens the whole lump. And so I just want to kind of go through some of these things, and then we'll kind of walk through these. These are very short clips, but we'll walk through them and I'll kind of give some of my feedback on them. And then, of course, as always, I'm interested to hear and see what some of your feedbacks are. Now, one of the beautiful things I have about being an atheist is that we don't all have to agree, right? Like, yeah. If it's not important, if it's not objective, then there's really no need to feel like we all have to agree. So there may be some things that I say that you disagree with, and there may be some things that you share in the comments that I may not agree with, and many times the only time I'll even let you know that I disagree, and actually I don't do that much, and just let you know I'm not feeling it. And that's just if it's negative, derogatory, or trollish. And for the most part, my subscribers don't behave that way, and so that's just beautiful. But let's get ready to jump in. Before we do, make sure you like the video, subscribe to the channel, check out the merch, consider joining our Patreon or our YouTube membership community. And of course, we are looking for volunteers. So if you want to be somebody who gets involved in what we're doing on the channel and our efforts to build secular community, holla at your boy. Visit our website, dldd.us. All right, so let's jump into this. Today, we have one of your favorite pastors. I hear this pastor's name mentioned a lot in the atheist community, and that is Joel Osteen. Now, I don't know how many of you know the story of Joel, but it's actually quite fascinating. His father was John Osteen, who was very much like Kenneth Hagin. I don't know if you're familiar with that name. I want to say Kenneth was out of Oklahoma. I think that's where Rainbow was. But Kenneth Hagin, John Osteen was in that type of arena. I had actually read one of his books when I was younger, which was about speaking in tongues, which is really funny because people were very disappointed, as far as the church world was very disappointed when Joel took over the church when John died, because Joel was not a preacher, was not a speaker. He actually worked in the media department. He handled their television broadcast and things of that nature. And he shifted the church largely away from charismata or charismatic, to types of preaching. So his father's church was more like a revival centric church, gifts of the spirit church. When Lakewood was run by John Osteen, it was, we're laying hands on the sick and we're doing this. And so it's always funny to me because Joel exists squarely in the middle. He is hated by Christians and atheists alike. But I will say a lot of it from both sides. Well, we'll get into that. Let's look at this clip real quick. So Joel is preaching to us today. Let's see what he has to say.
God knows how to make it up to you. When he sees you moving forward, when you could be sitting in defeat, you're praising when you could be complaining, you have a smile when you could be depressed, you're being good to someone even though you've been through hurts, you better get ready. God is going to show out in your life.
All right, so I wanted to pause it there, and there's only a little bit left. So this is going to be easy. So at first, I want to highlight the positive, and believe it or not, this is some of what a lot of Christians have a problem with Joel Osteen about, is that his messages are not necessarily grounded in doctrine or dogma. it's more so grounded in positive thinking. And that's what he's really saying here is that, like, hey, um, you could be sitting down and not doing anything, but you're getting up and you're making a way. That counts. You're still doing something that counts. And so, in a very real way, he is encouraging people here, right? He's letting them know that no, what you're doing is good, even though you're hurt and you're still helping people. That's good. Even though you feel like you've taken a few steps backwards, but you're still moving forward. That's good. And he's right there. Messages like that are absolutely needful, I think. And that's just by taking a survey of the state of many people. Just get into a few conversations with people and you'll realize how almost necessary. And I'm not necessarily saying it's a good thing, but I think it shows how unhealthy we have been in the way that we relate to each other. But you get enough people in the conversation, you will find out that yes, people need to be reminded that they're doing good things just by getting up and moving forward another day. And a part of that has to deal with that dissonance with their own superstition. Because it's their superstition that has made them feel that life is so hard, and I'm not trying to say life is easy, but it is a lot harder when you think that it is mysterious and beyond your understanding, and that the only way you can succeed in it is to properly interpret signs and omens, which is ultimately what a lot of this stuff ends up boiling down to. And we definitely see that in this case, because even though we do have that positive framework, I mean, many people would pay good money to hear this at a motivational speaking conference. And if you don't believe me, I don't know if you've ever done it, but go check out and see how much it costs to go to some of these motivational speaking conferences, where many of them are saying a lot of the same things. And I would say without the superstition, but that's really not the case. They're saying it without the religious superstition, but that magical thinking is often there, which is one of the reasons that when I left the pulpit, one of the options I had was to be a motivational speaker. And that's just not something that I wanted to personally be identified as. Like, yes, I have no problem acknowledging that I have the ability to motivate people, but I just did not necessarily want to identify with a profession that is actually not rooted in necessarily understanding, because I had already done that with the church world. And so I didn't want to go into something that looked just like the church world unless it was going to be an improvement, right? But so what he's saying here, it sounds good. Now, the insidious part of it is that then you are now disconnected from the outcome. You're disconnected from what happens next, because the message is God is going to make it up to you. Right? Not you are going to continue in this right way, and the more you keep on, the more you will learn, and the more you will learn, the more you will learn how to navigate, and the more you will learn how to navigate, the more lessons you will learn, the more failures you may have, but you will learn from each one of those failures, and eventually you will be able to craft something out of your life because you're just that capable. You're able because other people have done it, and people can do what people can do. Outside of extreme circumstances, if there's anything that one person can do anywhere on this planet, it doesn't matter if you live in a country that has capitalism, or you live in a country that has socialism, if you live in a country that has whatever, if you are a people, if you are a person, you do get to define your life. Now, is it some struggle? Are you going to have to fight some using kind of video game analogy, or actually more media archetypes, media tropes? You're going to have to fight some big bads. There's going to be stuff in your way. Such is the nature of entropy. But notice here, that is not the message. The message is not that you're learning. The message is that God is watching you, and because you're trying, God is going to do the work for you. And to me, that is a dangerous message, even when it's when it's tied in this bow tie of, yes, you're doing the right things, but then when you put the outcome in God's hands, which ultimately, for those of us who kind of, well, even Christians understand that putting things in God's hands is dangerous, because most Christians who would try to argue this will argue that God has no measurable impact. Now, they won't say it that way, but they'll say that God can't be measured, or that what God is doing can't be measured. And so if what God is doing cannot be measured, then what God is doing has no measurable impact. So you are now linking people's dependency to something that has no measurable impact. And unfortunately, teaching like this and preaching like this, tying that positive thinking with the agency of an inactive agent, or an irrelevant agent, I'll say it that way, tying that to that creates a situation where people lullaby themselves into believing that God has done what has not been done, and again, that's something that I do kind of find problematic. Another thing that I want to hit here before we pick it back up is, notice with the past two segments of our, what are these? Mastermind Review TikTok Theologies. I pointed this out and I want to point it out here. Notice that the message is focused on trauma. The message is focused on pain. The message is focused on your hurt. And the problem with this is that this means that the target audience is hurt folk. And that, and see, there's a lot of cultic red flags that immediately come to my mind when your target audience is just hurt folk. And your goal here, based off of the teaching, and we'll go through these segments for a while and see if there's any delineation. But the goal here then is ultimately not to deliver anybody from their hurt or teach people how to mature from their hurt. Otherwise, you wouldn't still be able to preach these messages. And so that's the alarming thing, that a lot of these services are preaching these same type of sermons every week. Every week we are preaching to the hurt. Every week we are preaching to people who can't deal with life. Every week we're preaching to people who cannot face having to pay their bills, or cannot face having to deal with the loss of a loved one, or cannot face someone breaking their heart, or cannot face somebody saying something on the job that they didn't like, or cannot face not getting a promotion, or cannot face not feeling like they are what they are where they should be. You know what I'm saying? So which means if this is what you're preaching every week, that means you have no expectation of growth. And as a matter of fact, you're kind of dependent on them not growing. Otherwise, your message is no longer relevant. But I do want to point that out. And honestly, I don't necessarily think preachers are doing that maliciously. I think they think they're doing the right thing, because the message, a lot of the message of the gospel in the urban churches is that, like, even my last few years of pastor, my mission was, to the least, the lost, and the last, to those who are hurting, to those who are rejected. And that sounds like a great mission. And it ultimately is a great mission if your purpose is rehabilitation. But if your aim isn't rehabilitation, then this is questionable. All right, so let's finish this clip out.
You will see greater favor because of the unfair things. The enemy meant it for harm. God is going to turn it to your advantage.
Okay, wait a minute. All right, let me stop this before it goes to the next. It does that every time. He says, you will receive greater favor because of the unfair situations. All right, when you're going through a hard time and you're in a vulnerable state, and please, mind you, to me, much of what has happened in a lot of these churches is definitely trauma bonds and attachment to trauma porn, right? But so you're in this church and you're hearing this, and it's just like, oh yeah, I have been hurt, and you open yourself up in that vulnerability, and then someone tells you you're going to receive greater favor because of those unfair things, and you're like, oh yes, sure, that might feel good. But when you come out of cloud cuckoo land, let's think this through. Because what this person has just told you is that God is going to do something unfair for you because of the unfair things that happen to you, which will ultimately be creating unfair situations for other people. Because if it is favorable for you, it is unfair for somebody else. This is not even a logical statement. But I have played into this. I have preached stuff just as nonsensical in my past. You know, truly, because knowing that this type of language, this type of poetic language, it is so attractive in the church culture, but not just the church culture, because what we have to understand, and y'all know I try to drive this point home, is that it's not just religion that we put these superstitions. Some other places that we use this flowery language is with our relationships, is with our music, you know, whether it's hip hop, country, whatever. And there is some beauty to it. So I'm not trying to take that away, but the problem is this isn't presented as art. It's presented as truth. It's not presented as expression. It's presented as objective, absolute truth. And in this case, it is absolute nonsense, you know? And unfortunately, because of our superstitious beliefs, those of us who are participating in moments like this are not always able to distinguish that and realize, hold up, you just said a bunch of nonsense. And not only was it nonsense, it's actually, you know, it's anti one particular interpretation of the Bible. And that one particular interpretation is that God is no respecter of persons. You know, but when you say God is going to give you greater favor, you're saying God is a respecter of persons. And then when you tie the reason that God is giving you that favor is because you've been through unfair things, then you're saying, hey, God is going to do unfair things for you because you've done unfair things, because unfair things have been done to you, which now puts God in the cycle of unfair things, you know, which and that's why I said one interpretation, because you can take that one scripture and say, yes, God is not a respecter of persons. But when you actually read the Bible, God very much is a respecter of persons. That's what the covenant is. That's what the chosen people is. That's what salvation is. All of that is a respecter of persons. I'm either respecting you because you're connected to Abraham, or I'm respecting you because you're connected to Jesus. But either way, if you're not connected to Jesus, I don't respect you. Or if you're not connected to Abraham, I don't respect you, unless you're willing to lie for me. And if you do that, then I respect you. Hello, Rahab. Oh, and Abraham told a lot of lies, as did Isaac. You know, it's a whole book of lies when you actually unpack it. But yeah, so I do find these things like this. I think these are things that we should pay attention to, and I hope that perhaps some of these segments we're giving some people some different things to think about, and perhaps some of our atheist activists giving you some new arsenal, so that you actually get this sneak peek. I know most of you are not interested in what's going on in the church world. I am still very highly interested, so I'm still watching, and so I am more than willing to be that conduit to bring some of this stuff to the surface, because I think it needs to be brought to the surface. You know, again, if this was just, you know, hey, this is just a humanistic gathering of expressing, you know, encouragement to one another, you know, in any shape, form, or fashion, it actually would be that big of a problem. It's the fact that we're telling people that what I just said to you is true. You know, and then again, in this case, this again kind of robs that agency and that autonomy to be responsible for your own self. And so now it's tied you to this place of magical thinking where you begin to believe that the good things that happen to you are God. And that sounds like a harmless belief at first, right? Like, no, there's nothing wrong with believing that. No, what actually happens there is you completely disconnect from your role in the good things that happen to you. And that's how you end up with a lot of people who don't know their own value, can't feel uncomfortable even discussing it, seeing themselves saying stuff like, "Oh, my story is not as great as other people's story, or as I'm not as good as other people are as good at," because you actually begin to think that who you are is set in stone, like it's carved and shaped. And that you have, no ability to scale or skill up, because everything that happens in your life is solely a product of your behavior with God, and not a product of your performance in the earth. So it's dangerous. It gets you into magical thinking. um and the real insidious part is that pastors who are successful often have a harder cognitive dissonance, not because of the success, but it's because of what they've had to do to be successful. And so many of them have had to learn, like, oh snap, this faith that I'm teaching, this faith that I'm preaching is not a faith that I can necessarily live by. Because if I did, then my church would not necessarily be doing well. And there are many pastors out there that are actually struggling with that I want to be able to tell my congregation that this is actually the way these things work. But if I do, then they'll think I'm being too practical and not spiritual enough. So these pastors, and I'm not saying it's right, I'm just trying to give you some insight. These pastors continue to preach faith and many times manufacture faith to keep the engine going, you know. And some of these engines do some powerful things. We could talk about all bad things that the church does all day, but I do want to be balanced in our review of the church, because the church also does things that, unfortunately, as of now, no other community do. And again, that needs to be a part of our conversation about building secular communities, because it makes no sense that the only place that are doing something for orphans and it makes no sense that the only places that are doing something for orphans and children who don't have their parents are Christian institutions. That's that the secular community can get involved with. Instead of us pointing at people who are doing it the wrong way, we can actually start trying to find a way to do it the right way. You know, um, there are some places that we can fill in that secular communities can do. And of course, I encourage us to approach the drawing board a little more organized than they do sometimes, so we can actually tie this into some solutions. And it's not just like a lot of these Christian institutions that do have these places that care for orphans and things of that nature. They have them for the sole purpose of being able to convert these kids. Um, and it's not even like just villainous, because many of them believe that's the only way these kids are going to have a healthy life. Some people are so locked into their superstitions, and I think many of you met people like that, where they honestly believe if you don't know my Jesus, you're going to be a criminal, and you're going to repeat the mistakes of the horrible parents who left you in these situations, who 9 times out of 10 were Christian parents. Which these are things that we often ignore, because we're like, oh, they were Christians. We say they weren't Christians because they weren't saved, or they weren't Christians because Christians wouldn't do things like this. And I'm like, really, Christians wouldn't do things like this? Then I don't know any fucking Christians, because it seems to be all the Christians I know do some of the worst things. Now I'm new to secular community, but so far they've been good folk. And for those of you that have heard my testimony, like, my issues with Christians started day damn one. I didn't get one day of seeing Christians just like, oh, these are cool people. Not one damn day out of 20 years. You understand? So, but yeah, I rambled a little bit. That was the goal. I'd love to see what you think in the comment. I'm through for now. Go ahead, make sure you like the video, subscribe to the channel, check out the merch, consider joining our Patreon or our YouTube community. And we're looking for volunteers, like straight up, we're looking for volunteers. Check out the website, dldd.us. Until next time, keep rising, stay progressive, and stay beautiful. Holla at you.